Cedar Hill woke up just like it had every morning for the past 30 years. In this town of 8,000 people, everyone knew each other, if not personally, then at least by reputation. There was no place for anonymity here, and every action became the subject of discussion at the dinner table or in line at the grocery store. Detective Hector Harrison parked his patrol car near the station at exactly 7 in the morning, as he had done every workday for the past 18 years. At 42, he was the embodiment of what a small-town police officer should be: tall, fit, with dark hair streaked with gray that gave him an air of authority, and the confident gait of a man accustomed to being respected. "Good morning, Detective," greeted Doris McLean, the station secretary, a woman of retirement age who knew all the town gossip and had worked there since the previous sheriff. "Good morning, Mrs. McLean. How are things at home?" Hector replied, stopping at her desk. He always took an interest in his employees' personal lives, which was one of the traits that made him popular among his colleagues. "My grandson is in trouble again with that girl from the east side. Young people are crazy these days." Doris shook her head, but there was no real condemnation in her voice. Hector nodded understandingly and headed for his desk. The Cedar Hill precinct was located in a small 2-story building built in the 1970s. The first floor housed the reception area, several detectives' offices, and an interrogation room. The sheriff's office and the archives were on the second floor. Everything was simple and functional, without any frills. Detective Lisa Cole was already sitting at the next desk, studying the case files on a series of garage burglaries that had been troubling residents in the eastern part of town for the past 2 months. Lisa was relatively new to the team, having moved to Cedar Hill from Detroit just 6 months ago after her divorce. At 34, she was an experienced detective, but the local specifics of working in a small town still seemed unusual to her. "Anything new on the garages?" Hector asked, sitting down at his desk and turning on his computer. "Another case on Oak Street last night. A lawnmower and a set of tools were stolen. Same modus operandi, no signs of forced entry, everything was neat and tidy. Either they have master keys or people just forget to lock their garages," Lisa replied without looking up from her papers. At that moment, Sheriff Tom Bradley walked into the station. At 55, he looked older, his gray hair and deep wrinkles telling the story of 30 years in law enforcement. Tom was one of those people who embodied the honesty and integrity of the old school. He knew every resident of the town personally, and was proud that the crime rate in Cedar Hill remained one of the lowest in the state. "Hector, we have a problem," he said, approaching the detective's desk. "A call from Maple Avenue. Domestic violence. Jim Collins is drunk again and beating his wife." Hector sighed. Jim Collins was a local problem, a former miner who had lost his job when the mine closed 5 years ago and had been drinking heavily ever since. His wife Mary had filed several reports, but then withdrew them, hoping her husband would change. "I'm on it," Hector said, standing up and checking his service weapon. "Take Cole with you. Let him get some experience working with the locals," the sheriff added. The Collins' house was in a working-class neighborhood where most of the houses had been built in the 1950s for miners' families. They were small, 1-story buildings with tiny yards, many of which were in need of repair. When the police car pulled up to 247 Collins, the neighbors had already gathered on their porches, discussing what was happening in hushed voices. Mary Collins met the police at the door. A woman of about 45, once beautiful, she now looked tired and lost. There was a fresh bruise on her left cheek. "He's in the living room. He passed out on the couch," she said, without looking up. Hector cautiously entered the house, Lisa following behind him. Jim Collins was indeed asleep on the old leather sofa, scattered beer cans and an overturned table eloquently telling the story of the previous evening. "Mary, what happened?" Hector asked gently. He had known the family for many years and remembered their children, who had long since moved away from the city. "He came home drunk as usual. He started yelling that I didn't respect him, that I blamed him for all our problems. He pushed me and I fell," the woman said quietly. "I don't want him to go to jail, Detective Harrison. I just don't know what to do." Lisa watched Hector talk to the victim. His approach was patient and understanding. He didn't pressure the woman or demand immediate decisions. This was a side of police work that required not only professional skills, but also human compassion. "Mary, I'll wake Jim up and we'll take him to the station for a night to sober up. That will give you some time to think. Do you have somewhere to go in the meantime?" Hector suggested. "I'll go to my sister's." The woman nodded. After Jim Collins was taken to the station and placed in a drunk tank, Hector and Lisa returned to their routine work. The day passed quietly. A few minor traffic violations, a complaint about loud music, a call about a missing cat. Just another day in a small town. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the station radio came to life. The dispatcher's voice was clear and professional. "All units, traffic accident at the intersection of Main Street and Cherry Avenue. There are injuries." Hector recognized the dispatcher's voice. It was Pearl Mitchell, who had been working in emergency response for 3 years. Her voice was one he heard almost every workday, coordinating responses to various incidents. Professional, calm, always collected, even in stressful situations. "Roger, dispatcher. Detective Harrison is on his way," Hector replied into the radio, already heading for the exit. The accident turned out to be serious, a head-on collision between a pickup truck and a sedan. The driver of the sedan, an elderly man, was taken to the hospital with a suspected concussion, while the driver of the pickup truck escaped with minor injuries. Hector spent almost 2 hours at the scene, filing a report and interviewing witnesses. When he returned to the station, the workday was coming to an end. Most of the employees had already started getting ready to go home. Hector decided to stop by the dispatch room to clarify some details about the accident for his report. The dispatch center was located in the basement of the station building. The small room was filled with monitors, radio equipment, and city maps. Dispatchers were on duty around the clock, coordinating the work of the police, fire department, and ambulance service. Pearl Mitchell sat at the central console, wearing large headphones, closely watching the readings on the screens. When Hector entered, she turned and took off her headphones. At 29, Pearl was an attractive woman with light hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and intelligent brown eyes. A recent divorce had left her looking tired, but it had not broken her determination. "Detective Harrison, how's it going on Cherry Avenue?" she asked, leaning back in her chair. "Everything's under control. Old man Wilson's in the hospital, but the doctors say it's nothing serious. I need the exact time of the first call for the report," Hector replied, moving closer to the console. While Pearl searched for the necessary information on the computer, Hector couldn't help but notice how focused she was, how confidently she handled the complex equipment. There was a grace in her movements and a natural warmth in her voice that shone through even her professional reserve. The first call came in at 2:17 p.m., the ambulance arrived at 2:24 p.m., and the police arrived at 2:26 p.m., she reported, turning to face him. "Thanks. Good work today, as always," Hector said, his voice warmer than the situation called for. Pearl smiled slightly. "Just doing my job, Detective." When Hector left the dispatch room, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. He had known Pearl as a professional dispatcher for 3 years, but today, for the first time, he had truly seen her as a woman. The thought bothered him, but he tried to push it aside, focusing on his upcoming drive home. The Harrisons' house was located in a respectable neighborhood on Elm Street. It was a 2-story house with white siding and a red tile roof, a neat lawn, and flower beds that were the pride of his wife, Jessie. It was the epitome of the middle-class American dream: stability, prosperity, and respect in the community. Jessie met him at the door. At 38, she was still a beautiful woman, although the years of married life and 2 children had left their mark. Her job as a nurse at the local hospital was demanding, but she managed to juggle her roles as a police officer's wife, mother, and professional. "How was your day?" she asked, helping him take off his uniform jacket. "The usual. Collins was acting up again. Accident on Cherry Avenue. Nothing special," Hector replied, washing his hands in the kitchen sink. The whole family gathered for dinner. 15-year-old Michael talked about his upcoming school basketball game, while 13-year-old Emily complained about her unfair math teacher. It was a normal family atmosphere, warm and familiar. But Hector found himself thinking about his conversation with Pearl earlier that day. Something in her eyes, the way she smiled when he praised her work, made him think about her. He knew it was wrong, that he should focus on his family, but the image of the dispatcher wouldn't leave him. That evening, after the children had gone to do their homework and Jesse was watching TV, Hector sat in his office reviewing reports. But it was difficult to concentrate. He began to recall details: how Pearl had fixed her hair, how she had leaned toward the monitor, how she had looked at him as he left. Hector had always considered himself a model family man, a man of principles. But something about today's encounter had awakened feelings in him that he hadn't felt in a long time. Perhaps it was just fatigue from the routine, a desire for something new in the measured life of a small town. 2 weeks had passed since the day Hector first really noticed Pearl. During that time, he found many reasons to go down to the dispatch room, to clarify the details of incidents, check the time of calls, consult on technical issues. Each time, he convinced himself that these were purely work-related matters, but deep down, he knew he was looking for an excuse to see her. Pearl also began to notice his frequent visits. After a difficult divorce that ended 6 months ago, she tried to stay away from men, focusing on her work and rebuilding her life. But Hector's attention flattered her. He wasn't just a colleague. He was a symbol of stability and respect in the city, the kind of man everyone looked up to with admiration. On that Thursday, as rain drummed on the windows of the station and most of the staff had left to respond to calls, Hector came down to the dispatch room again. This time he really did have business there. He needed to clarify the patrol route for the evening shift. "Pearl, can you show me the coverage map for Sector 3?" he asked, approaching her workstation. As she leaned over the computer to pull up the right map, Hector caught a whiff of her perfume, a light floral scent that made his heart beat faster. Their shoulders were almost touching, and he could see a slight blush on her cheeks. "Here," she said, pointing to the screen. Her voice sounded a little quieter than usual. "Thanks," Hector replied, but he didn't move away from the screen. "How are you? Are you adjusting to all the changes in your life?" Pearl looked up at him. He saw surprise in her eyes. None of his colleagues had ever asked about her personal life so directly before. "I'm trying. Divorce is always difficult, but I'm managing," she replied honestly. "And you? Family? Children? You must have a lot on your plate. Kids grow up fast. Sometimes I feel like I hardly see them because of work," Hector said, and there was genuine sadness in his voice. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but both felt that something had changed between them. An invisible line had been crossed. They had moved from a purely professional relationship to a personal one. In the days that followed, their encounters became more frequent and longer. Hector lingered in the dispatch room longer than necessary, and Pearl found reasons to leave her post when she saw him in the hallway. They began exchanging glances across the common break room and smiles when they happened to meet at the coffee machine. Detective Lisa Cole was the first to notice the change in her partner's behavior. Over the months they had worked together, she had grown accustomed to his calmness and predictability. But now Hector seemed distracted. He checked his phone more often, paused in the middle of conversations, and found reasons to stay at the station after his shift ended. "Hector, is everything okay?" she asked one day as they patrolled the eastern part of town. "You seem distracted lately." "Everything's fine, just a lot going on," he dismissed her. But Lisa didn't believe him. Her experience as a detective told her that her colleague was hiding something. At home, the situation was becoming increasingly tense. As a nurse, Jessie was used to reading people and noticing small changes in behavior. She could see that her husband had become more distant, that his thoughts were often far away, even when he was physically present. "Hector, we haven't had a real conversation in a long time," she said one evening after the children had gone to bed. They were sitting in the living room, he was watching TV, she was knitting. "What is there to talk about? Work, the kids, the house, everything is the same as always," he replied, without taking his eyes off the screen. "That's the problem. Usual. When was the last time we talked about anything other than everyday stuff? When was the last time we went somewhere together?" Jessie's voice betrayed her exhaustion from the emotional distance. Hector finally looked at his wife. He saw the pain and confusion in her eyes, but he didn't know what to say. Admitting his feelings for Pearl was impossible, and pretending that everything was fine was becoming increasingly difficult. "I'm sorry, honey. I'm just under a lot of stress at work. New projects, paperwork," he lied. Jessie nodded, but inside she felt uneasy. In 18 years of marriage, she had learned to tell when her husband was telling the truth and when he was evading the question. Meanwhile, Hector and Pearl's relationship continued to develop. They began to meet by chance at lunchtime at Mary's Cafe on Main Street. Pearl talked about her divorce, how difficult it was to start over at 30, and her dreams of moving to a big city where there were more opportunities for career advancement. Hector shared his disappointments in his family life, talked about how he felt trapped in the routine of a small town, and his desire for something more than patrolling familiar streets and solving the same problems. "Sometimes I feel like I'm not living my own life," he confessed one day, stirring his coffee. "Everything is fine. Everything is as it should be, but I feel empty inside." "I understand," Pearl replied, and there was sincerity in her eyes. "After my divorce, I realized that for many years I had simply existed rather than lived. I did what was expected of me, not what I wanted to do." These revelations brought them closer together. Hector began to see Pearl not just as an attractive woman, but as a kindred spirit, someone who understood his inner conflicts. The first physical contact occurred a month after they began their informal relationship. They met in the city park in the evening, supposedly by chance. Hector went out for a run, and Pearl was walking after a hard day. As they talked, sitting on a bench under an old oak tree, their hands accidentally touched. Neither of them pulled away. "This isn't right," Hector said quietly. "I know," Pearl replied, but her hand remained next to his. They sat there for 10 minutes without speaking, feeling a connection that was stronger than logic or morality. When they parted, they both knew they had crossed another line. At the station, their behavior became increasingly noticeable to attentive observers. Sheriff Tom Bradley, who had known Hector for 20 years, began to notice strange behavior in his best detective. Hector became more nervous, distracted, and often went down to the dispatch room for no apparent reason. "Hector, come see me," the sheriff called him one morning. Tom's office always smelled of coffee and old leather. The walls were covered with photos from award ceremonies, diplomas, and thank you letters from town residents. "Sit down. I want to talk to you as a friend," Tom began, putting aside his papers. "You've been acting strange lately. Is something wrong?" Hector felt his heart beat faster. Had their connection with Pearl become so obvious? "Everything's fine, boss. Just a little tired." He tried to brush it off with generalities. "Hector, I've known you since you came here green as a pea. I've seen you get married, have children, and grow professionally. And I can see when something's wrong with you," Tom said seriously, but without judgment. "Really, everything's fine. Maybe I'll take a couple of days off to relax," Hector said, avoiding direct eye contact. Tom nodded, but his concern remained. He decided not to press the issue for now, but to keep an eye on the situation. After talking to the sheriff, Hector realized he needed to be more careful, but he couldn't stop now. His relationship with Pearl gave him what he lacked at home, a sense of novelty, passion, and understanding. Pearl, for her part, had also become emotionally dependent on the relationship. After a painful divorce, she felt unwanted and rejected. The attention of a man as respected as Hector restored her self-esteem. But gradually, it began to seem insufficient to see each other secretly, to meet by chance, to hide their feelings. She wanted more. She wanted to be with him openly. She wanted a relationship without secrets and lies. "Hector, I'm tired of hiding," she said one evening when they met in an empty cafe outside the city. "What are we doing? Where is this going?" Hector felt panic rising. He wasn't ready for this conversation, hadn't thought about the future of their relationship beyond today. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "It's complicated. I have a family, children, a job. And I have feelings," Pearl replied, her voice determined. "I don't want to be your secret. Either we build something real or we end this now." Hector realized that the moment of choice was approaching. He couldn't keep balancing two lives, two women, two versions of himself forever. At home, the atmosphere was getting colder. Jessie stopped asking about work and stopped caring about his mood. She focused on the kids and her responsibilities, but inside, resentment and suspicion were growing. One evening, while checking her husband's shirt pockets before washing them, she found a receipt from a cafe called You Rosie outside the city. a cafe they had never been to together. The receipt was for two. Jessie stared at the small piece of paper for a long time, feeling her world crumble. She didn't make a scene or demand an explanation. Instead, she began to observe and notice details she had previously ignored. The new cologne Hector had started using, the delays at work that had become too frequent, the phone calls he took in another room. Detective Cole also continued her observations. Her professional training did not allow her to ignore the oddities in her partner's behavior. She noticed that Hector was avoiding certain topics in conversation, had become more secretive, and was frequently checking his phone. All the threads began to weave together into a dangerous web of lies and secrets. In a small town where everyone knows each other, it was becoming increasingly difficult to keep a secret. Too many people were beginning to notice, ask questions, and draw conclusions. Pearl became more and more insistent in her demands. She felt she had a right to an honest relationship, to a future with the man she loved. She didn't understand why Hector was hesitating, why he couldn't make a decision. "I'm not going to wait forever," she warned him during one of their meetings. "I'm 30 years old. I want a family, children, a real life, not secrets and stolen hours." Hector felt the walls closing in around him. The pressure was mounting from all sides, and he knew that soon he would have to make a choice that would change his whole life. October brought the first cold weather to Cedar Hill. The leaves on the trees turned golden and crimson, and the morning air became crisp and fresh. But the beauty of the season could not hide the growing tension that permeated the lives of the main characters in this story. Hector woke up that morning with a heavy feeling in his chest. Jessie was sleeping next to him, her back turned to him, a position that had become common for her in recent weeks. Behind the wall, he could hear the alarm clock of his son Michael, who was getting ready for school. It was a normal family morning, but nothing about it seemed normal anymore. A tense silence reigned at breakfast. Jessie silently cooked eggs while the children sat with their heads buried in their phones. Hector tried to read the morning news on his tablet, but the words blurred before his eyes. "Mom, can I stay at Brandy's after school today?" asked 13-year-old Emily. "Ask your father," Jessie replied curtly, without looking up from the frying pan. Hector felt a twinge of pain. His wife had always made such decisions herself, without passing the responsibility on to him. Now every word she said sounded like a veiled reproach. "Sure, sweetie," he said to his daughter, but his voice sounded strained. The day at the station began with an unpleasant surprise. On Hector's desk was a note from Sheriff Bradley asking him to see him as soon as possible. The detective's heart sank. Had Tom found out something? But first, he had to check the dispatch room. Over the past few days, Pearl had become more insistent in her demands, and Hector felt the need to talk to her before the situation got out of hand. Going down to the basement, he found Pearl at her usual desk. She looked tired. Dark circles under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights. When she saw him, a glimmer of hope flashed in her eyes. "Hector, we need to talk," she said, taking off her headphones. "Not here," he replied, looking around. "Let's meet tonight, same place." "No," Pearl said abruptly. "I'm not going to meet you in secret anymore, as if we're doing something shameful. We're adults. We have feelings for each other." Hector felt panic rising. Pearl was speaking louder than usual, and there could be people in the hallway. "Pearl, please be reasonable. Be sensible?" Her voice grew even louder. "I've been sensible for 3 months. I waited for you to decide what was more important to you, your family or what we have." At that moment, Detective Cole entered the dispatch room. She stopped in the doorway, seeing the tense scene between her colleagues. Pearl quickly turned back to the monitors, pretending to work, while Hector tried to make it look like a business conversation. "Detective Harrison, Sheriff Bradley wants to see you," Lisa said, watching their reactions closely. "I'm coming," Hector replied curtly and hurried out of the dispatch room. Lisa lingered for a few seconds, studying Pearl's face. An experienced detective, she was good at reading people, and what she saw confirmed her suspicions that something was going on between her partner and the dispatcher. In the sheriff's office, Hector tried to look calm, but Tom Bradley knew him too well. "Sit down, Hector. We need to talk seriously," the sheriff began, putting aside his papers. If this is about the Wilkins case, I've almost finished the report. This isn't about the case, Tom interrupted. This is about you. Hector, in 30 years on the job, I've seen a lot of cops who've been in tough situations, and I see all the signs that you're in one right now. Hector felt his palms sweat. Boss, I don't know what you're talking about. You've been distracted, nervous, and easily distracted. Cole said you've been acting strange while on patrol, and this morning, I saw you come out of the dispatch room and you and Miss Mitchell were having some kind of conflict. Hector's heart was beating so loudly that he thought Tom must be able to hear it. There was no conflict. We were just discussing technical coordination issues. Tom looked at him for a long time, then sighed heavily. Hector, I know you as an honest man, but right now you're lying to me, and that's what worries me the most. The sheriff stood up and walked over to the window. If you have problems, family, personal, financial, we can work them out, but only if you're honest with me. Hector hesitated. Part of him wanted to confess, tell everything, ask for help. But another part understood that confessing would destroy his career, his reputation, his whole life. Everything's fine, Tom. Really. Maybe I'm just overworked. I'll take a couple of days off to clear my head. The sheriff turned to him. There was disappointment in his eyes. All right, take the weekend off. But Hector, remember, there's no place for secrets in our line of work. Sooner or later, everything comes out. Leaving the office, Hector felt cornered. The walls were closing in on him, and every day brought new problems. He arrived home later than usual, hoping his family had already had dinner. But Jessie was waiting for him in the living room, sitting in an armchair with some papers in her hands. "We need to talk," she said when he entered. Hector felt a familiar panic rising. "Are the kids asleep?" "Yes, sit down." He sat down on the sofa opposite his wife. Jessie silently handed him several checks and photographs. "What's this?" he asked, even though he already knew. "Checks from a cafe we've never been to. A photo Mary Simpson showed me of you and some woman in a park. Phone bills with numbers I don't recognize." Hector looked at the evidence of his infidelity and knew there was no point in denying it. Jessie had worked methodically, like a detective, gathering clues. "Jessie, I can explain." 18 years of marriage," his wife interrupted. Her voice trembled, but she held her ground. "For 18 years, I thought I knew you, that we were a team, that we had an honest relationship. We are a team. You are the most important person in my life." "Don't lie to me anymore!" Jessie exploded. "Don't you dare say I'm important when you're having an affair with another woman!" Hector lowered his head. The moment of truth had come, and there was no running away from it anymore. "It's not what you think." "What is it then? Explain to me what it is if it's not cheating." He tried to find words that could justify his actions, but there were none. "It just happened. I didn't plan it. I didn't want it." "Who is she?" Jessie asked quietly. Hector hesitated. Saying her name would make the situation even more real, more painful. Pearl Mitchell from Dispatch." Jessie nodded, as if her suspicions had been confirmed. "Is she younger than me?" "Jessie, that doesn't matter. It matters to me. Is she younger?" "Yes," he admitted quietly. Jessie closed her eyes, trying to cope with the pain. When she opened them again, they were steely. "I want you to move out. Today." "Jessie, wait. Let's talk. Let's figure this out." "No, I can't look at you right now. I need time to think about the kids, about our future, and you need to decide what you want." Hector realized it was useless to argue. He went up to the bedroom and silently began packing his things into a bag. Each item, a shirt Jessie had ironed, a photo of the children on the nightstand, a book he had been reading before bed, seemed like an indictment of the person he had become. When he came downstairs with his bag, the living room was silent. Jessie was sitting in the same chair, staring out the window. "Where are you going?" she asked without turning to him. "To a motel on the highway until I figure things out." "What about the kids?" "I'll explain to them. Tomorrow." Jessie nodded. "Don't tell them about her. Bye." Hector paused at the door. "Jessie, Go," she said quietly. "Just go." The Pine Grove Motel was 10 minutes' drive from the city. It was a cheap place for passing truckers and the occasional tourist. Hector rented a room for an indefinite period, feeling his life falling apart. Sitting on the rickety bed in the shabby room, he realized he had to talk to Pearl. She had a right to know what had happened, that their relationship had led to the destruction of his family. He called her on his cell phone. "Hector, what's wrong? You sound strange. We need to meet. Now. It's urgent." "Where?" "In the park. In half an hour." The park was empty on that cold October evening. Pearl arrived in her coat, wrapped tightly against the wind. When she saw the look on Hector's face, her enthusiasm turned to concern. "What happened?" "Jessie knows. Everything. She kicked me out of the house." Pearl froze. A whole range of emotions flashed across her eyes. Shock, fear, but also something like relief. "What now?" "I don't know," Hector replied honestly. "My life is ruined. My children, God, what am I going to tell them?" Pearl moved closer to him. "Hector, maybe this is a sign. Maybe fate has decided for us?" He looked at her in confusion. "A sign? Pearl, I've lost my family. But now you're free! Now we can be together for real!" Hector saw the sparkle in her eyes and realized that they were seeing the situation in completely different ways. For him, it was a disaster, the collapse of his entire life. For her, it was an opportunity to get what she wanted. "Pearl, you don't understand. If this gets out, I'll lose not only my family, but also my job, my reputation, everything. Then we'll leave. We'll start a new life in another city. I can work as a dispatcher anywhere, and you... and me? What will I do without my job in the police? It's all I know. The conversation became increasingly tense. Pearl couldn't understand why Hector wasn't happy about the opportunity to be with her openly. Hector couldn't explain to her that the price of their relationship was too high. "Hector, I love you," she said, taking his hands. "We can overcome any difficulties." "Love?" he asked. "Pearl, we've known each other for a few months. We met in secret, talked about our disappointments. This isn't love, it's infatuation." Pearl pulled her hands away as if he had hit her. "Infatuation? Was it just an infatuation for you?" "That's not what I meant." "No, you told the truth. I was just entertainment for you. A way to escape your boring family life." "Pearl, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it that way." But she was already walking away from him, and there was hurt and anger in her eyes. "You know what, Hector? Maybe your wife didn't find out by accident. Maybe it's time everyone knew the truth about who you really are." The threat was clear. Hector felt a chill in his stomach. "What do you mean?" "I mean that if our relationship meant nothing to you, then I have no reason to hide it. Let everyone know that Detective Harrison is a hypocrite and a cheater." Pearl turned and walked toward the park exit. Hector stood alone, realizing that the situation was spiraling out of control. The woman who had recently been his comfort was now becoming a threat to everything he had left. He returned to the motel with a heavy heart. Ahead of him lay a sleepless night, followed by a conversation with his children, attempts to keep his job, and a fight to salvage what was left of his reputation. The next 3 days were spent in agonizing anticipation. Hector spent his nights in a shabby motel and tried to work during the day, avoiding unnecessary contact with his colleagues. Pearl didn't show up for work, calling in sick with the flu. But Hector knew the real reason for her absence. On Thursday evening, she finally called him. "We need to meet," she said without preamble. Her voice sounded cold and determined. "Pearl, let's not make this worse. Either we meet and talk like human beings, or tomorrow morning I'm going to Sheriff Bradley. You choose." Hector's heart began to race. "Where?" "The old warehouse on Industrial Road. You know, where the textile factory used to be. 9 o'clock. "Pearl, why there? Let's meet at a cafe." "No, there are too many people there. I need a place where no one will see or hear us. We need to have a serious talk." The connection was cut off. Hector stared at the phone for a long time, feeling a growing sense of anxiety. The choice of meeting place bothered him, an abandoned industrial area outside the city where there was no one around at night. He spent the rest of the day at the station on edge. Detective Cole tried several times to talk to him, but he responded in monosyllables, clearly not in the mood for conversation. Sheriff Bradley also watched him with growing concern. "Hector, you look terrible," Tom said, cornering him in the hallway. "Maybe you should take some time off? A long vacation?" "I'm fine, boss. Just personal problems." "That's what worries me. In our line of work, personal problems shouldn't interfere with our professional duties. Hector nodded and hurried to the exit. He knew Tom was right, but right now he didn't have the energy to think about work. All his thoughts were focused on his upcoming meeting with Pearl. At 8:30, he left the motel and drove to the old textile factory. The road led through an industrial area that had once been the heart of the local economy, but had now become a graveyard of rusty buildings and weed-covered vacant lots. The warehouse was a large brick building with broken windows and a sagging roof. Pearl's car was already in the parking lot. Hector parked next to it and turned off the engine. In the gathering twilight, the place looked particularly gloomy. Pearl was waiting for him inside the warehouse, standing by one of the few intact windows. She was wearing a dark coat, her hair loose. When he appeared, she turned around, and Hector saw that her eyes were red from crying. "You came," she said. "Did you doubt it?" Pearl smiled without humor. "After you called our relationship a fling?" "Yes, I did." Hector sighed. The warehouse was cold and damp, their voices echoing off the concrete walls. "Pearl, I didn't mean to hurt you. It's just happening too fast, too painfully." "Painful for you? What about me?" There was bitterness in her voice. "I lost my head over you. I believed we could have a future, and you just used me to take your mind off things." "That's not true." "Then what was it, Hector? Explain it to me!" Hector struggled to find the words. In the dim light of the warehouse, Pearl seemed both vulnerable and dangerous. "It was real. What I felt for you was real, but I didn't think about the consequences. And now you do? Now I realize I've destroyed my family. I've let my children down. I've jeopardized my career." Pearl moved closer. In the dim light filtering through the broken windows, her face looked pale. "And what do you want? To go back to your wife? To pretend that nothing ever happened between us?" "I don't know what I want," Hector admitted honestly. "All I know is that my life is falling apart." "What about my life? You think it's easy for me? I'm risking my job and my reputation too." "No one forced you." "No one forced me?" Pearl exploded. "You made me believe that you needed me, that you loved me." "I never said I loved you." The word sounded like a slap in the face. Pearl recoiled as if he had hit her. "So it was just fun after all," she whispered. Hector realized he had said the wrong thing. "Pearl, that's not what I meant." "No, you told the truth. Finally." Pearl turned to the window. "You know what I'm going to do tomorrow morning? Listen, let's find a way to settle this civilized." "Civilized?" She laughed, but it sounded hysterical. "You're a married man who seduced his subordinate. How can this be civilized?" "I didn't seduce you. You did it yourself." "Did what? Throw yourself at me? Make me cheat on my wife?" The conversation heated up. Hector felt anger rising in his chest. The last few days had been a nightmare, and now Pearl was making him feel guilty for everything. "Stop playing the victim. You knew perfectly well that I was married. And you knew perfectly well that I was vulnerable after my divorce. You took advantage of that. No one took advantage of anyone. We're both adults. Then act like one. Take responsibility for your actions." "What responsibility? Get a divorce? Leave my children? Lose my job?" "Yes, if that's what it takes to be honest." Hector felt something inside him break. Months of tension, lies, pressure from all sides, it all came pouring out. "You're out of your mind. I'm not going to ruin my life for a few weeks of madness." Pearl turned to face him. Her eyes were on fire. "Madness? So it was madness to you?" "Yes, a temporary lapse of reason, a midlife crisis. Call it what you want." Silence hung between them. Pearl looked at him as if she were seeing him for the first time. "I see," she said quietly. "Then tomorrow morning, the whole neighborhood will know about your temporary insanity. Let's see how Sheriff Bradley reacts." "You wouldn't dare." "I would. I have photos of our meetings, recordings of our phone conversations, witnesses. Do you think I'm stupid?" Hector felt the ground slipping away beneath his feet. "What recordings? What witnesses? What do you think? I work with recording equipment every day, and people saw us at the cafe in the park. It's hard to hide in a small town." Panic gripped Hector. If Pearl really had evidence, his career was over, and without a job in the police force, he was nobody. "Pearl, don't do this. Think about the consequences." It will ruin not only my life, but yours as well. You've already ruined my life, she replied coldly. At least I won't be suffering alone. What do you want? First, I wanted you. Then I wanted honesty. Now I want justice. What justice? I want everyone to know who you really are. Not a hero cop, not a model family man. You're a liar and a seducer. Hector took a step toward her. His voice took on a threatening tone. If you do that, I'll destroy you. I'll find a way to make it look like you're a slut who seduced a married man. Pearl didn't back down. Try it. Let's see who they believe, you or me. They'll believe me. I have an impeccable reputation. You did, before you decided to have fun with your subordinate. Rage clouded Hector's eyes. Everything he had built over the years, his career, his reputation, the respect of his colleagues, was in jeopardy because of this woman, and she dared to threaten him. You'll ruin my life. You ruined it yourself. I'm just going to tell everyone the truth. Shut up, Hector barked, grabbing her by the shoulders. Shut up and listen. You're not going to say a word. Do you understand? Pearl tried to break free from his grip. Let me go. You're hurting me. Hurting you? Are you hurt? Hector shook her, losing control of himself. How do you think I feel? You want to destroy my whole life. I want justice. Justice? He pushed her, and Pearl stumbled, almost falling. What justice? You came to me. You made eyes at me. You demanded to see me. Pearl straightened up, her eyes flashing with anger. Yes, because I thought you were a decent man, but you're just a coward and a liar. Something finally snapped in Hector. Years of restraint, self-control, and proper behavior exploded in a single second. He saw red before his eyes. A coward? He growled, grabbing her by the shoulders again. A coward! He shook her so hard that Pearl's head jerked back and forth. She tried to scream, but he covered her mouth with his hand. Don't you dare! Don't you dare talk to me like that! Pearl pulled one hand free and hit him across the face as hard as she could. Hector staggered back, feeling a burning sensation on his cheek. You hit me, he said incredulously, and I'll hit you again if you don't let go. But Hector couldn't hear her words anymore. A storm of rage, fear, and despair raged in his head, everything mixed together into a roaring whirlwind of emotions. He grabbed a piece of metal rebar lying nearby. Hector, no! Pearl screamed, seeing what he was about to do, but it was too late. The blow struck her temple. Pearl fell to the concrete floor and didn't move. There was dead silence. Hector stood over the body, breathing heavily, still holding the bloody rebar in his hand. The reality of what had happened gradually dawned on him. Pearl? He called softly. She didn't answer. Hector knelt down beside her. Blood spread across the concrete in a dark stain. He checked her pulse. Nothing. Oh God, he whispered. Oh God, what have I done? Panic gripped him with renewed force. He had killed her. He had killed the woman he was having an affair with. This was the end of everything. His career, his family, his freedom. Hector jumped to his feet, throwing the rebar aside. He had to think, act, cover his tracks, come up with an alibi. He took out his phone and checked the time. 9:45. The meeting had lasted less than an hour, but it had changed everything. First, he wiped the rebar with his shirt, removing his fingerprints. Then he looked around the scene. His car was parked next to Pearl's. That was bad. Someone could have seen them, but the industrial area was deserted. The nearest houses were several kilometers away. The chances of anyone seeing them were minimal. Hector tried to think like a detective. What would he look for at a crime scene? Fingerprints. He had wiped them off. DNA. That was more difficult, but an abandoned warehouse was full of dust and dirt. Witnesses? None. The keys to Pearl's car were lying next to her body. Hector picked them up, trying not to look at her face. He quickly searched the car, taking her phone and purse. He had to get the body and the car away from the meeting place. He had to make it look like Pearl had disappeared somewhere else. Hector moved the body to the trunk of Pearl's car, trying not to think about the fact that just a few hours ago, this woman had been alive. Then he got behind the wheel of her car and drove to Cedar Lake, which was 20 kilometers from the city. The lake was deep and rarely visited, especially during the cold season. It was the perfect place to get rid of the evidence. When he reached the deserted shore, Hector pulled the body out of the trunk. Pearl was heavier than he had expected. He dragged her to the water and pushed her into the lake. The body disappeared into the dark water. He left the car on the road a few kilometers from the lake, after wiping down all the surfaces he could touch. He threw the keys into the bushes. He got home to the motel in his own car after midnight. In the shower, he washed the dirt and sweat off himself for a long time, trying to wash away the memories of what had happened, but they wouldn't wash away. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Pearl's face in the last seconds of her life. He heard her scream. He felt the rebar entering her head. In the morning, Sheriff Bradley was waiting for him at the station. "Hector, we have a problem. Pearl Mitchell hasn't shown up for work and isn't answering her phone. Her neighbor says she hasn't seen her since last night." Hector feigned surprise. "That's strange. Maybe she's sick?" "Maybe, but I don't like that she didn't call. It's not like her." "Do you want me to go to her house?" Tom nodded. "Yes, take Cole with you. Check her apartment, ask the neighbors." An hour later, the unofficial investigation into Pearl Mitchell's disappearance began. An investigation that was to be led by the man who had killed her the night before. Pearl's apartment was in a small complex on the east side of town. When Hector and Detective Cole pulled up to the building, they were greeted by an agitated elderly woman, Mrs. Henderson, Pearl's neighbor. "Officers, finally, I'm so worried about Pearl. She's such a responsible girl, she never disappears like this." Hector turned on his tape recorder and took out his notebook, playing the role of a caring detective. Inside, he felt sick with disgust for himself. "When was the last time you saw Miss Mitchell?" Lisa asked. "Yesterday around 7 in the evening. She was leaving the house looking agitated. She said she was going to an important meeting." Hector felt his mouth go dry. "Did she mention who she was meeting?" "No, but I got the impression it was a man. She was wearing a lot of makeup." Lisa carefully wrote down his statement. Hector noticed how she studied his reactions. Pearl's apartment was small but cozy. Detective Cole methodically searched the rooms, while Hector pretended to look for clues, even though he knew perfectly well that he wouldn't find anything. Pearl had taken all her important things with her to the meeting. "Strange," said Lisa, examining the bedside table. "There are photos of family and friends, but they're all old, nothing recent." Hector came over to take a look. Among the photos, he saw a picture of himself and Pearl taken in a cafe. His heart skipped a beat, but he quickly regained his composure. "Who's this?" Lisa asked, pointing to the photo. "I don't know, maybe one of my colleagues," Hector lied, discreetly slipping the photo into his pocket. In the bedroom, Lisa found a diary. Hector watched her leaf through it, hoping that Pearl hadn't written about their relationship in detail. "These are work notes, plans for the weekend. Oh, this is interesting." Lisa showed him a page. The last entry. "Today, everything will be decided. I can't live like this anymore. It's dated yesterday." Hector nodded, feigning professional interest. "Maybe she had personal problems." "Yes, but what kind?" In the living room, they found a stack of printed documents, bank statements, bills, correspondence with a divorce lawyer. Lisa looked through them carefully. Financial problems after the divorce, debts. She was clearly looking for ways to improve her situation. When they finished searching the apartment, Lisa suggested checking Pearl's workstation in the dispatch room. Hector agreed, although every step was difficult for him. Mark Taylor, Pearl's colleague, was on duty in the dispatch room. He confirmed that she had left work at the usual time yesterday, but had seemed tense. She got a call around 5. After that, she became nervous and kept looking at her watch. Lisa checked the call log. The call came from a cell phone number. We'll have to find out whose number it is. Hector knew it was his number. He had to do something before Lisa traced the call. "Detective Cole, maybe we should check the hospitals too? She might have had an accident." "Good idea. You take the hospitals and I'll work on the phone records." They split up. Hector drove to the hospital where his wife worked, hoping to buy some time. But trouble awaited him there as well. Jessie met him in the hospital hallway. Her face was stone. "What are you doing here?" "Working, looking for a missing woman." "What woman?" Hector hesitated. "A colleague from the station, Pearl Mitchell." Jessie's expression changed. She looked at him with new understanding. "Looking for your mistress?" "Jessie, not here." "Where then? You're never at home anymore." The conversation attracted the attention of the medical staff. Hector realized he had to leave quickly. "We'll talk later." "We have nothing to talk about. But I'm curious, did she run away from you or did you get rid of her?" His wife's last words sounded like a sentence. Hector hurriedly left the hospital, feeling the walls closing in on him. Back at the station, he learned that Detective Cole had already traced the owner of the phone number Pearl had called from. "Hector, we need to talk," she said when he entered the office. "What did you find?" "The phone number is registered to you." Hector's heart stopped. "What?" "The last call Pearl received was from your number, at 5:23 yesterday." Lisa looked at him intently, studying his reaction. Hector realized he had to act quickly. "Yes, I called her. About work. I wanted to clarify some details about last week's accident. At 5 in the evening, after work? We have irregular hours, you know." Lisa nodded, but her eyes were wary. "And you didn't talk to her after that?" "No, only about work." "That's strange. What's this?" Lisa took a printout of phone calls from her folder. Hector saw a long list of calls between his number and Pearl's number over the past 3 months. That's a lot of calls for a purely professional relationship. Hector felt his palms sweat. "We often coordinated our activities. We have a complicated job." "Some of the calls lasted half an hour. What can you discuss with a dispatcher for half an hour?" "Listen, Lisa, what are you getting at?" "I'm doing my job, and I think you're hiding something." At that moment, Sheriff Bradley entered the office. His face was grim. "Hector, I need to talk to you, alone." Lisa left, leaving them alone. Tom closed the door and sat down across from Hector. "Mark Taylor told me something interesting. He says that in recent months you've been going down to the dispatch room a lot, more than your job requires." "Tom, I don't understand. And your wife called me. She said you were cheating on her with Pearl Mitchell." Hector felt his last line of defense crumbling. "Jessie is going through a divorce. She's saying stupid things." "Hector, stop lying!" the sheriff exploded. 20 years of friendship. I know you like the back of my hand, and I can see you're lying." There was silence. Hector knew the game was up, but he still hoped to salvage something. "Okay, yes, we had an affair, but that doesn't mean I know where she is." "When was the last time you saw her?" "A few days ago. We had a fight. She threatened to tell everyone." Tom leaned forward. "What did you fight about?" "She wanted me to get a divorce. I wasn't ready." "And what did she say?" Hector hesitated. Admitting to threats meant giving a motive for murder. "She said she'd think about our future." The sheriff didn't believe him. "Hector, if you know anything about her disappearance, you'd better tell me now." "I don't know anything." There was a knock at the door. Detective Cole entered with new documents. "Sheriff, I found Pearl's car. It's on Lake Road, 5 kilometers from Cedar Lake." Hector felt a chill in his stomach. They had found the car faster than he expected. "What's the car like?" Tom asked. "It's parked on the side of the road, locked. No keys, but there are signs of a struggle inside." The sheriff looked at Hector. "Cedar Lake, you're there a lot, fishing. So does half the town. Lisa, organize a search around the lake. Divers, dogs, whatever it takes." Cole nodded and left. Tom stayed with Hector. "Last chance, buddy. If she's dead, you'd better confess now." Hector looked into the eyes of the man who was like a father to him, the man he had betrayed every minute of the last day. "She's alive," he lied. "She just ran away. She was scared of the scandal." Tom looked at him for a long time, then shook his head. "I'm taking you off the case and off the force until the circumstances are clarified." "Tom, you can't." "I can, and I am. Hand over your weapon and badge." With a heavy heart, Hector complied. 20 years of service were ending like this, in an atmosphere of suspicion and shame. Leaving the station, he got into his car and drove to the lake. He needed to see the search site to understand how much danger he was in. There were many cars at the lake, police, divers, volunteers. Hector parked at a distance and watched. 2 hours later, the divers found the body. Hector watched as they pulled what was left of Pearl Mitchell out of the water. The fish and time had done their work, but the cause of death was obvious: a head injury. Detective Cole coordinated the work at the scene. When the body was loaded into the ambulance, she approached the group of police officers. "Murder, blunt force trauma, Judging by the condition of the body, it happened last night. Hector realized that the time had come to confess. The evidence was irrefutable: his connection to the victim, the last phone calls, the car near the lake where he often went. He returned to the station and asked to see Sheriff Bradley. "Tom, I'm ready to talk." They sat down in the interrogation room. Detective Cole turned on the tape recorder. "I killed Pearl Mitchell," Hector said quietly. Silence fell in the room. Tom covered his face with his hands. "Tell me what happened." And Hector told him about his lonely marriage, about meeting Pearl, about how their relationship began, about the threats, about their last meeting, about how rage clouded his mind. "I didn't mean to kill her, I just lost control." "Where's the murder weapon?" "A piece of rebar. I threw it in the lake near the body." Lisa wrote down every word. Tom sat silently, digesting the betrayal of a man he had trusted for 20 years. "What happens next?" Hector asked. "Next, you're going to prison, and I'll have to explain to the town how one of our best detectives became a murderer." An hour later, Hector Harrison was arrested on charges of first-degree murder. The news shook Cedar Hill. A man who had been trusted, who had been a symbol of order and justice, turned out to be a criminal. Jesse filed for divorce. The children refused to see him. His colleagues felt betrayed. The small town, where everyone knew each other, realized that knowing a person and understanding them were two different things. The trial lasted 3 months. Hector was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Detective Lisa Cole became the new senior detective on the beat. Sheriff Tom Bradley retired a year after Hector's arrest, unable to recover from the betrayal. Cedar Hill remained the same quiet town, but its residents now knew that behind the facade of prosperity, the darkest secrets of the human soul could lurk.